Hi guys, it's great to see you again. Now, we'll identify outgoing and incoming messages. Before that, let's correct a few things that we deliberately left out. In this lecture, we'll send quite a bit of messages, so it's a perfect time to do this correction. This is where we display fake media data to the chat view. So, if we send a photo, it will show up twice on the chat view. One is shown directly without the server, and one is pulled from the database. So let's delete these two lines which directly append the photo chosen from the library to the message array. In the previous lectures, we didn't send then retrieve media messages right away. So it didn't matter till now. Alright, let's send a photo again. Let's choose a different one. Alright, it's being sent. Great. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for the video messages. We won't demo afterwards though. Okay, now one more thing. For now, after we send a text message like test, then the text remains in the input text field. That's not so nice, so let's fix it. We want to clear this text field after the user sends the message. So we need to do this business at the end of the didPressSend button method. JSQ View Controller has a method specifically for this task named finishSendingMessage. Basically, it clears the input text field. You can also write your own function, but there's really no point of doing that. Alright, this will disappear after the message is sent, and perfect. Now, let's identify in and out messages. By default, our outgoing JSQ messages show up on the right of the chat view. For now, every message shows up on one side because the app is still confused, so let's help it. Alright, now let's say you sign in the app, then JSQ Chat View Controller instance will be initialized. The app will start retrieving messages from the database one by one. We knew that. Consider a certain retrieved message. We want to know if it's an out message or an in message. But an in or out with respect to what? Of course, in or out relatively to a JSQ user, precisely the current JSQ user, which is you've initialized the JSQ message view controller, right? Intuitively, if it's previously sent by you, the current JSQ user, then it's an outgoing message. Otherwise, it's an incoming message. So we need to help the app answer the question, is this message sent by the current user or not? Thus, we need a proper sending scheme based on it. The app can answer this question. Alright, let's say the current user previously sent this message. Our sending scheme should make this user link up with the message. One way is like, if you want to claim you checked baggage at the airport, make it clear that you sent this luggage. But how? Well, put your ID on it, something uniquely identifying you. So, our sending scheme should tag the current JSQ user ID to the message sent by this user. Each time you initialize a JSQ instance, you're required to set the sender ID property of this class. That's your JSQ user ID. This is important. It's not your Firebase user ID. Although we'll use Firebase ID for sender ID eventually, but they're distinct. So when we send this message, we'll encode the JSQ sender ID into the message, and based on this sending scheme when retrieving it, it's easy to check if this message was sent by this current JSQ user by checking that the sender ID is identical to the current JSQ user ID. Now the only thing left is a good way to identify JSQ users. And using authentication ID is a great way for this, but if you have a better identification scheme, go ahead. Alright, earlier, each time we initialize a JSQ instance, we set the required property sender ID to some value, and we already encoded this ID into the messages sent by this user. For now, we set this JSQ user ID the same for every user, which is a bad scheme. That's why the app doesn't know which message was sent by whom. So we'll first get the current user authentication via the current user property of the FIR auth class. Alright? But let's print out the current user ID to see. Our plan is to use this Firebase user ID to identify the current JSQ user. Meaning, assign the Firebase current user ID to the sender ID property of JSQ. Okay, our app knows the current user ID. Now let's assign this current user ID to the sender ID property of JSQ message view controller. Let's delete the print command. This is important. We use the Firebase user ID for the JSQ sender ID, but they're not the same thing. Alright, JSQ will automatically position the in and out messages properly. Alright, great. The messages in the database are now on the left, which are the incoming messages. Alright? Now, let this current user send a message. Fantastic, it's an outgoing message. Alright, we can see that its sender ID is the current user ID we printed out before. The others have a dummy sender ID, which is different from the current user ID, so they're incoming messages. Alright, let's now customize the shape of incoming messages. Currently, we're using the outgoing text bubble in media view for all messages with the tail on the right. For text bubbles, we did that when constructing the collection view using this outgoing message bubble image method. Basically, in this function, we return a bubble shape for the message in a certain collection view cell. Currently, we return an outgoing bubble for every cell. Although JSQ can detect in and out messages, but it doesn't shape them properly, so we have to do it manually. So let's first get the message at a certain collection view cell by extracting it from the message array at the corresponding index. Basically, this is the cell index. We check if this message is outgoing or incoming by comparing its sender ID to the sender ID property of JSQ. This property actually holds the Firebase current user ID because we set it like that previously. If these IDs are identical, this is an outgoing message. Otherwise, it's an incoming message. If it's an outgoing message, then use an outgoing bubble to wrap it using the code before. On the other hand, if it's an incoming, then return an incoming bubble to represent this message. So, let's return an incoming bubble image. Actually, let's reuse the code above with some modification. So copy these lines over. JSQ message view controller has a similar method for incoming bubble image. Alright? It returns a bubble with the tail on the left. We'll use a different color for these incoming bubble images. Actually, let's clean up some repeating code first. Alright, let's use a blue color for incoming text message bubbles. And later in the course, we'll customize the UI again. Let's just put something down for now. Alright, good. By the way, for media files, it needs to be customized in a different way. Great, that works for text message bubbles. Photo and video views are set to outgoing files by default. The constructor of JSQ media items has a Boolean property which basically says, this is an outgoing media item, and things like that. So we need to set this flag properly when creating a JSQ media item from the retrieved data. In the observe messages method, set the applies media view mask as outgoing property of the JSQ photo item to true or false, depending on if the pulled message is outgoing or not. It's true by default, that's why all media messages have outgoing shape. As before, we compared the current JSQ user and the message sender to figure out if the message is outgoing. Again, recall that we assigned the sender ID property of the chat view the current user ID. And it's encoded into messages before they're sent. Alright, we compare it to the message sender ID which is pulled from the database. If they're identical, then the media item is outgoing. And we can apply the outgoing media view mask for this item by set this property to true. Alright, very good, alright. Otherwise, it's an incoming media file. In this case, we set the applies media view mask as outgoing to false to get to the shape with its tail on the left. Alright, great, let's check it out. Again, JSQ can automatically detect in and out messages to locate them accordingly. But it doesn't shape them properly, so we have to do that. Now, go ahead and do the same thing for video items. Simply reuse the code and replace photo stuff by video things. Alright, let's check it out. By the way, you, the current user, know which are incoming messages but don't know exactly who sent them. We'll talk about it next time. Alright, let's send a video. We only have a video, so let's just send it. Alright, great. It's indeed an outgoing message. Let's log into another Firebase account. Alright, great. The messages we've just sent are now incoming messages with respect to this other user. Let's test it out one last time. Actually, to save time, let's send a photo. By the way, do you notice that this user doesn't know the sender of each of the incoming messages? If you think about it, the only ingredient we used in this lecture is the Firebase current user property. That means an app instance can only know if a message was sent by the current user or not. It isn't able to answer the question, if the message was not sent by the current user, then by whom was it sent? We'll answer that question next time by constructing a user database. See you then!